It was the year 2006. The FIFA World Cup competition was being held in Germany, and Ghana was making our first ever appearance in the World Cup. We had made it quite far and were the only African country to have made it past the group stage. That year, Ghana was the hope of Africa. We beat the USA and Czech Republic, finishing second to Italy in Group E. Now, to move to the next stage, we had to beat the winners of Group F, Brazil. I keep saying we, as though I was on the field kicking the ball with them. Typically, I wouldn't be found watching a football match on any given day. But in the spirit of patriotism, I wanted to go all out in support of my country. I donned on my Ghana flag and vuvuzela, ready to cheer my country to victory. Sat in front of the TV, all hyped up as the game began. Next thing I know, I suddenly woke up. And the game was over. I must have fallen asleep like 5 minutes in. I stepped out of my house and the atmosphere was somber. Every face I saw on that late afternoon was morose at the very best. Nobody had to tell me they had lost. It almost felt like a nationwide mourning. That's how much football means to the average Ghanaian. At the time, as a non-football fan, I found it kind of funny. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, guys, it's not that serious. But for those passionate about the game, football is life. Or in this case, unfortunately, death. The love of the game led to the deaths of 126 people. Some reports say 127. It also led to the physical injury of over 300 people. This is the story of how Africa's biggest football tragedy to date happened. So, one hot and sticky Wednesday afternoon in May of 2001, at the Accra Sports Stadium, two of Ghana's most beloved teams, Asante Kotoko and Accra Folk, were set to clash. This was part of the Ghana Premier League games. Now, at the time, these two teams were the biggest in the country, and their rivalry was often regarded as the El Clasico of West Africa. Both teams garnered strong fandoms that would often organize transportation and show up to loudly cheer their teams to victory. If you think the Swifties are crazed, you should meet Chapter O, one of Hearts of Oak's biggest, if not their biggest fandom. They would often engage in what I could only describe as ritualistic practices by going around distributing meat to the poor as some sort of sacrifice to the football gods. When die-hard fans convened to their spots for the match, they will sing Jama throughout the over 90 minutes game. Now, Jama is kind of like cheerleading, except instead of beautiful women in short skirts doing acrobatics, it's often men and boys, sometimes bare-chested, with inscriptions written on their face and bodies, drumming intensely, blowing vuvuzelas, and singing curated songs aimed at motivating their team while simultaneously intimidating the opposing team. Emotions were always high during games. And where emotions are high, there is a higher risk for volatility. Many supporters viewed game outcomes through a lens of existential significance. It's commonplace, even in present day, to see grown men lose all appetite for food or weeping bitterly because their team lost. Accra Sports Stadium, now renamed Ohenijan Sports Stadium, was packed with about 3,000 people on that day. As is often the case, there were security measures taken to ensure that law and order was in place. There were police officers as well as a riot control team present. The game started out as usual and things were running smoothly. Asante Kotoko was in the lead by 1 goal. However, late in the game, seemingly out of nowhere, Accra Hearts of Oak scored 2 goals in the very final minutes of the game. This left the goal tally as 2-1 for Accra Hearts of Oak. Naturally, the fans of Asante Kotoko weren't too happy with it, and a section of them in the North Stand, feeling very disappointed by the results and perceiving that the refereeing for the home team had been biased, began to vandalize the stadium. I'm sure you've seen those videos of guys just losing their minds and destroying things because their team lost. Now, imagine all those guys gathered in one spot. That was kind of the case that day. The unhappy fans, they began ripping out plastic seats and along with bottles and other debris, throwing them into the pitch and the tartan tracks. Now, here's where things went even more sideways than they already had. The police officers, upon seeing the chaos, started deploying several canisters of tear gas and firing rubber bullets into the densely populated North Stand. Tear gas isn't an uncommon method law enforcement uses to subdue a belligerent mob. However, the deployment of irritant gas in a confined space without adequate warning was actually not in line with the police's own operational guidelines. And it in fact violated these guidelines. So let's take a look at why tear gas, right? Tear gas works by irritating the mucous membranes in the eyes, nose, mouth, and lungs. This irritation stimulates the nerves of the lacrimal gland in the eye to produce tears. So that's where it gets its name from. Tear gas can cause severe eye and respiratory pain, skin irritation, coughing, difficulty breathing, pain in the eyes, and temporary blindness. The goal of using tear gas is to make the mob so uncomfortable that they have no choice but to disperse. Tear gas, when one comes into contact with it, it typically does not lead to death. So how did its deployment in this particular instance result in over 100 deaths? The indiscriminate spraying of the gas initiated a wave of mass panic. Now imagine a situation where emotions are high and you don't know anything about tear gas, you've never encountered it before, and suddenly it starts being thrown at you, and all the symptoms that we've described so far, you start experiencing them. Naturally, most people would panic and seek to get away from the irritant gas, right? So as the irritant fumes spread, thousands of fans attempted to flee the stands simultaneously. This resulted in a stampede. Though a stampede all by itself is an already dangerous situation to be in, there were some structural blind spots in the stadium that exacerbated this already dire situation. So the first one we'll talk about, have you seen those videos where a troublesome spectator jumps onto the field and runs around, sometimes in the middle of a game? They would often run to their favorite player, and this causes all sorts of havoc and disrupts the game. The pitch at the Accra Sports Stadium was designed to prevent this exact same scenario. It had been secured with high perimeter fencing topped with barbed wire and spikes. So when the chaos erupted, fans could not simply escape onto the pitch. That left them with just the stairways leading from the stands as their only escape route. Now, these stairways were about 1 meter wide. There's a meter. Okay. So you can imagine tons of panicked people rushing down a meter wide staircase. It's chaos. And if one was fortunate enough to make it past these stairways unharmed, they now had to contend with the gates. This was the third structural issue, right? Many of the primary gates leading out of the stadium were for some reason locked. That ended up trapping thousands of fans in the 1 meter passageways. The few exits available had narrow cages and metal railings that inadvertently ended up creating a bottleneck effect. This bottleneck effect led to the compressive asphyxia that claimed the majority of the lives that day. Comprehensive asphyxia is a fatal form of mechanical suffocation where external pressure on the chest and abdomen ends up preventing one from breathing. So you are trying to get out of this very small space and so many people are coming. If you aren't able to get out in time, they just keep coming and piling onto you. So eventually the person in front gets crushed, and by that, and with being crushed, they end up suffocating. The ordeal lasted for about an hour as fans were crushed against the locked gates and each other. By the time it was over, the stadium floors were lined with piles of bodies. In the aftermath of the whole tragedy, a commission chaired by Mr. Sam Akudjeto was formed to investigate what went wrong and who was responsible for it. After many hearings, the Akudjeto Commission found a couple of things. The first one, and I'm guessing many of you can have guessed this already, was that the police had overreacted and been reckless with their indiscriminate shooting. They actually perjured themselves during the inquiry and even went so far as to falsify records in an attempt to hide who ordered the initial spraying of the tear gas and the rubber bullets. The second conclusion the commission came to was that the National Sports Council was found to have allowed the stadium to fall into a state of dangerous disrepair. So this has me here wondering, maybe, you see I mentioned that before, many of the doors were locked. So I'm here wondering now, were so many doors locked because they were in such a bad state that they could literally not function? The third thing that was discovered was that the medical team and paramedics assigned to the match, they had left the stadium before the game ended. So there was no professional first aid when the stampede began. And to make matters worse than they already were, the stadium's first aid room was found to have been locked. So during the whole crisis, if a lay person with some knowledge of first aid even decided to take it upon themselves to help out, they would have no way to access the materials that they would need to effectively do so. At the end of the inquiry, the acting chief executive of the National Sports Council was dismissed, and the commission recommended that 6 senior officers be charged with manslaughter. Thankfully, the recommendation was endorsed by the government at the time, and the 6 were set to trial. The trial of the 6 police officers began in the High Court of Accra, with the accused pleading not guilty to 127 counts of manslaughter. The prosecution, I think they did their job. They presented photographic evidence and witness accounts to establish the 6 officers' presence and their actions during the firing of the tear gas. However, the court ultimately ruled in favor of the defense. The court concluded that if the fans hadn't started vandalizing, there would have been no cause of panic and subsequently no stampede. So, no comprehensive asphyxia. This verdict left survivors and families devastated. They rightfully felt that the legal system had failed to hold any individual accountable for the loss of their 127 lives. Other than the dismissal of the head of the National Sports Council, there were no real consequences for those who were negligent. No jail time. Nothing. So we've talked about the deaths and the injuries, but an often overlooked impact was the psychological impact on the survivors who witnessed the carnage. The psychological toll of the tragedy led to several documented cases of suicide among survivors in the years following the event. There were also widespread issues with alcoholism and broken marriages attributed to the trauma. Now, on a more positive note, I guess, the stadium finally underwent a massive renovation in 2007. This renovation was so that it met the FIFA standards ahead of the 2008 African Cup of Nations. So the disaster happened in 2001, and these upgrades were done in 2007. What was happening between that time? Between that time, which is the 6 years, the stadium resumed operations. It actually resumed operations exactly 1 month after the incident, June 2001. The goal of the 2007 upgrades was to directly address the flaws identified in the 2001 disaster. So the upgrades, they focused on removing barriers and increasing capacity for mass exodus if the need should arise. So a few of the changes they made was that the barbed wire surrounding the pitch that was meant to keep streakers out, it was replaced by a modern low-profile barrier that allows for emergency escape onto the pitch should the need ever arise. Also, the 1 meter wide stairways, they were widened and the number of exit points were increased to prevent the bottleneck effect seen in 2001. Also, automatic turnstiles were installed to allow for better monitoring of crowd numbers and prevent the manual locking of gates by untrained staff. So, what do you think? Was the Accra Sports Stadium an isolated incident of bad luck? Or was it the predictable outcome of an environment where architectural neglect met a punitive policing culture? Was it the fans' fault for succumbing to high emotions and getting violent? Or were the 127 deaths the result of fans being forced to choose between the chemical agony of tear gas and the physical crash of a bottlenecked exit?